Imagine waking up this September, only to discover your diesel car is no longer welcome where you drive every day. Millions of UK drivers are hearing alarming claims that 2.5 million diesel cars could be affected in 2026. But is it really true? More importantly, could your vehicle be on the list? Before panic sets in, let's separate the facts from the headlines and reveal exactly what's changing. Here's the mechanism you need to understand, because it explains everything that's coming. Britain isn't banning diesel, it's pricing it out, city by city, charge by charge, until the economics do the job a ban never had to. The core dividing line for almost every scheme in the country is the Euro 6 emissions standard, which became mandatory for the vast majority of new diesel registrations from September 2015 onwards. If your diesel was registered after that date, in most cases you're compliant and largely unaffected by any of this. If it was registered before that date, you're in the group these schemes are specifically designed to squeeze. London's ultra-low emission zone, now covering all 32 London boroughs after its 2023 expansion, charges any non-compliant diesel £12.50 a day, every single day, with no exceptions beyond Christmas Day. Drive into London 5 days a week, in an older diesel, and you're looking at over £60 a week just to exist inside the zone, before you've paid for a single mile of fuel. And London isn't unique anymore. Clean air zones are now running across multiple English cities, including Birmingham, Bristol, Bath, Bradford, Portsmouth, Sheffield, and the Tyneside area covering Newcastle and Gateshead. In Scotland, low-emission zones cover Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, and Dundee. The specific charges and vehicle classes vary from city to city. Some catch private cars, some only catch commercial vehicles and older buses. But the direction of travel is identical everywhere. Daily charges for non-compliant diesels in these zones typically run somewhere between £8 and £12. And one expert prediction doing the rounds as 2026 got underway is that more UK cities will introduce these zones over the course of the year, not fewer. On top of all of that, there's Euro 7. This is the next generation of emissions standards, expected to come into force through 2026. And while the tailpipe limits aren't dramatically different from Euro 6 on paper, it introduces something new: regulation of non-exhaust emissions like brake dust and tire particles. And it requires vehicles to stay compliant for a much longer period, up to 10 years or 124,000 miles, compared to Euro 6's shorter window. There's genuine uncertainty and no small amount of owner anxiety about whether existing clean air zones will eventually tighten their requirements to reference Euro 7 standards instead of Euro 6, which would instantly reclassify a huge number of currently compliant diesels as non-compliant overnight. As it stands, that hasn't happened, and any change to an existing scheme like London's ULEZ would legally require a full public consultation first. But it's exactly the kind of policy uncertainty that makes diesel owners nervous, and nervous owners sell. So forget the ban headline for a second, because I want to spend some real time on the number that actually matters here. And it isn't a number attached to any piece of legislation at all. It's resale value. This is the part of the story that barely gets covered, and it's the part that's already costing diesel owners real money right now, quietly, in the background, whether or not a single new law ever gets passed. Here's the basic mechanism. A pre-Euro 6 diesel, one registered before September 2015, is driving straight into a shrinking pool of buyers, and that pool shrinks a little further every single time a city announces a new clean air zone or expands the boundary of an existing one. Think about what that actually does to the market. Every buyer who used to be a candidate for that car in Birmingham, in Bristol, in London, in Bath, gradually gets priced out of considering it at all, because they know the moment they take ownership, they're taking on a daily or weekly charge just to use it normally. And it's not only about people who currently live inside a zone. It's about anyone who might need to drive into one occasionally, for work, for family, for a hospital appointment, a football match, a concert. That uncertainty alone is enough to push a cautious buyer toward a compliant alternative, even if they don't drive into a zoned city every week. And here's the part that makes it worse than a normal, gradual depreciation curve. Depreciation on an ordinary car tends to slow down as it ages. A new car loses the most value in its first year, a chunk more over the following two, and then the rate of loss gradually flattens out as the car gets older and cheaper. Older pre-Euro 6 diesels are increasingly breaking that pattern. Because the pressure on them isn't really coming from mileage or condition anymore, it's coming from geography and regulation, both of which get worse over time rather than better. A 12-year-old diesel with genuinely low mileage and a full service history should, on paper, be holding its value reasonably well at this point in its life. In practice, if it's non-compliant and it's sitting in or near a city with an active or expanding clean air zone, it's often losing value faster than cars several years newer, purely because the pool of people willing to take it on keeps getting smaller. Now let's actually put a number on what that pool of buyers is dealing with, because the maths for a daily user is brutal, and most owners genuinely don't sit down and add it up. A pre-Euro 6 diesel driven into London every working day faces roughly £87.50 a week just in ULEZ charges, before a single mile of fuel, before insurance, before servicing, before a single MOT advisory gets fixed. Run that across a working year, and you're somewhere north of £4,500, spent purely on the privilege of continuing to drive a car you already fully own into your own capital city. Outside London, the numbers are usually a little softer, typically somewhere between £8 and £12 a day, depending on the specific clean air zone. But the principle doesn't change. You're not paying that money to a government ban. You're paying it because the car itself has become the expensive part of the equation, and no discount, warranty, or full-service history changes that underlying fact. There's a second layer to this that dealers and finance companies understand far better than most private owners do, and it's worth spelling out plainly. Trade data from the motor industry increasingly treats fuel type as a genuine risk category when appraising stock, in the same way condition, mileage, and service history always have been. Diesel is now flagged differently at auction depending on whether it's Euro 6 compliant or not, with pre-Euro 6 stock treated as higher risk to acquire because it's slower to shift and needs a bigger discount to move. Some trade analysis has gone as far as tracking how often diesels get resold within just a few months of a private purchase, a pattern that shows up disproportionately in this bracket, which tells you something important. A meaningful number of owners are buying older diesels, realizing fairly quickly what they're actually going to cost to run day to day, and trying to offload them again almost immediately. That kind of rapid turnover is exactly the sort of thing that keeps pushing prices down further, because it adds extra supply back into an already softening part of the market. Geography matters enormously here too, and it's worth being specific about it rather than treating the whole country as one market, because it isn't. Away from major cities, particularly in rural areas where high-mileage motorway driving is normal and there's no clean air zone anywhere nearby, diesel is still holding up reasonably well, and for genuinely good reasons. The fuel economy advantage on long, steady motorway journeys is real. Towing capability still favors diesel in a lot of cases, and a rural buyer isn't paying ULEZ charges they're never going to encounter. But that's precisely why this isn't a uniform national story. The same car, same age, same mileage, same condition can be worth meaningfully more sitting on a forecourt in a rural county than it's worth sitting on a forecourt 20 minutes from a city center with an active or newly expanded zone. If you're planning to sell, where you sell matters almost as much as what you're selling. None of this is a ban. Nobody is stopping you from owning, driving, or keeping any of these cars for as long as you like. But what it adds up to is a tax on ownership that gets heavier every single year, stacked directly on top of a used car market that is already pricing in exactly this risk, whether the person selling the car has explained any of it to you or not. Dealers know this. Finance companies know this, which is exactly why residual value assumptions on diesel-backed PCP agreements have been getting more conservative, meaning tighter monthly payments and smaller expected trade-in values baked in from day one. And it's already fully visible in how older diesels are being valued at auction and on forecourts across the country right now. Quietly, continuously, regardless of whether a single new headline-grabbing piece of legislation ever actually gets passed. Let's be precise about this, because the anxiety around this topic tends to spread further than the actual risk. If your diesel was first registered from September 2015 onwards, and it's genuinely Euro 6 compliant, which you can check directly against your V5C logbook, or through the official government and Transport for London vehicle checkers, rather than just trusting the seller's word, you are largely unaffected by any of this right now. You'll pay the same road tax as an equivalent petrol car, based on CO2 emissions rather than fuel type, and you'll drive through every current clean air zone and ULEZ boundary in the country without paying a daily charge. If your diesel was registered before September 2015, particularly if you live in or regularly drive into London, Birmingham, Bristol, or any of the other zoned cities, this is the group actually being squeezed, and it's worth being honest with yourself about the real annual cost of keeping that car, rather than just absorbing the charges quietly and hoping the situation improves. It generally isn't going to improve. It's going to keep tightening. And if you're a company car driver or you're managing a small fleet, there's an additional wrinkle worth knowing. Only diesels meeting the stricter RDE2 real driving emissions test, which corresponds to full Euro 6D compliance rather than the earlier Euro 6B or Euro 6C substandards, are exempt from an additional 4% benefit in kind tax supplement. Two cars can both say Euro 6 on paper and be treated completely differently by HMRC. So if diesel is part of a company fleet decision, that distinction is worth checking properly, rather than assuming all Euro 6 diesels are treated equally. So here's what I'd genuinely suggest, depending on where you sit. First, check your actual compliance status today, not your assumption of it. Don't rely on the registration date alone, because some cars sold in late 2015 still carried older Euro 5 engines ahead of the full switchover. Use the official government or Transport for London checker with your registration number and get a definitive answer in under a minute. Second, if you're non-compliant and you regularly drive into a zoned city, actually run the numbers on what you're paying annually in charges versus what it would cost to change vehicles. People tend to absorb these charges quietly for years without ever adding them up, and the total is almost always more startling than they expect. Third, if you're planning to sell a pre-Euro 6 diesel, don't wait for the right moment. Every additional clean air zone announcement chips away at the buyer pool a little further, and used diesel values in this bracket have been on a fairly consistent downward slope for exactly that reason. The longer you hold, the smaller the market gets. Fourth, if you're currently shopping and diesel is still on your list, there's nothing wrong with a genuinely Euro 6 compliant diesel bought with your eyes open, particularly for high-mileage motorway driving, where diesel's fuel economy advantage still holds up well. Just build the Euro 7 uncertainty into your thinking, and don't assume today's compliant car stays compliant forever if the rules around it shift again down the line. And fifth, ignore the specific ban headlines entirely as a decision-making tool. They're not describing current policy, and reacting to them will only push you into a rushed decision. React to the actual documented clean air zone map, the actual charges, and your own genuine driving pattern instead.